Hi and welcome! I'm currently developing a small stealth game called Moonveil, and this video is a mix between a devlog, a tutorial, and an asset review. This video's focus is on level building, and not the abstract parts like making it fun, but the actual practical steps, organizing your hierarchy, setting up shortcuts and helpers, what to do before you start placing your very first wall in the scene, and more. I always wished there was a guide like this back when I started working in 3D, and I guess I'm making it myself now, so that others can get a good starting point. I'm using Synty Samurai Empire Pack, but many of the techniques here work just as well with your own models or any free or paid assets. If you have any tips, tricks, or insights of your own, please share them in the comments so others can learn from them as well. Also, I'm curious. But before we jump in, here's a bit of context. Moonveil is a stealth game inspired by Thief, the Dark Project. You play as a spirit-turned-human on a quest, one that conveniently involves filling your pockets with glittery valuables along the way. Expect sneaking, listening, avoiding guards, and finding hidden passageways. It's going to be released on itch in just a few weeks and will be free to play. I reached out to Synty a while ago and pitched them the idea of, hey, if you are okay with giving me access to the pack and I like it, I'll make a spotlight video. And they were on board with no strings attached. So a sincere thank you to Synty for this. I guess neither they nor I had expected me to jump headfirst into developing a whole game with it. But I only recommend the assets I enjoy working with, and I can't just make a fly-through of a scene I know nothing about. It's just not my style. So while this pack was provided to me for free, I stand by all my opinions expressed here, and none of the things I say in this video were required for me by Synty. And after spending a few weeks of time with it, I can say that the Samurai Empire Pack is an absolute joy to work with. You'll find an affiliate link to it in the description and pinned comment. So again, thank you Synty, and let's get started. The Samurai Empire Pack is massive. Just getting this out first, because I hadn't expected this to be quite the size it truly is. I mean, there are the preview images, sure, but those don't always take into account how many alternative textures there are on top of everything else. And while I've worked with other packs before, like the Biomes pack for Down the Mountain or the Street Racer pack for Traxanity, neither of them felt this varied to me. You'll notice it's one of what feels like their newer style packs. This one uses their vegetation shaders, so you won't find those blob-shaped trees, bushes or flowers here anymore. Which is something I really appreciate a lot. I like the low poly style in general, but plants and humanoids are what typically drives me away from packs. And apart from the typical assets like vegetation or architecture, you'll find a lot of general clutter in this pack. Clutter is what makes your scene feel alive, from small pebbles to things of daily use and onwards to larger elements like shelves, target practice elements or crates. This pack has a good variety of elements for each size you'll need and focuses, of course, on Japan-inspired elements like brushes and inks, low tables, scrolls and banners. I particularly enjoyed the variety in banners here, or even taiko drums. But all this clutter and all those other elements also come with quite a bit of homework. Sorting and preparing everything to get ready for level building. Maybe you have seen this asset before in other videos of mine. It's Smart Library, and one entry in my default list of assets I use in every project of mine. It lets you create collections to sort elements into, which keep the elements in their original place, but makes it so much easier to find exactly those elements you are looking for. Don't confuse it with Asset Library, which I'm sure is great as well, but this one works with the set you already have in your project. Without this asset, I would probably still be sorting elements into folders. For Moonveil, I took what I learned in Down the Mountain and Traxanity and started my categories from larger elements down to smaller ones, going by gut feeling and which overarching theme I'd be looking for when needing an element. Floors, roofs, walls, doors and such went into architecture and its subcategories. Everything garden related went into the scenery, and clutter, well, went into clutter. And let me tell you, I should have been more granular in sorting these elements. My clutter ground folder, for example, holds everything I would be placing on a flat surface, like floors or tables. The clutter found in the Samurai pack roughly falls into the items of daily use, like items for calligraphy, small elements of comfort like pillows and rugs, weaponry, items to store stuff into, a whole lot of food-related elements like single vegetables, but also kitchenware and tools. Throwing all of these into just one generalized clutter category made life unnecessarily hard while furnishing the scenes. So for the next time I'm working with one of their sets, I will make sure to take just an hour more to be a lot more fine-grained in my sorting system. Preparation work like that really makes a difference once you're at the stage of furnishing your level. And apropos furnishing, this is something I highly recommend to tackle early as well. Filling your shelves. Placing one shelf in some room and making it look distinct is always an option, but once you are faced with furnishing a storage space, a store, or just more than just 3 rooms, you will most likely thank yourself for having prepared this in advance. Just make sure you do this with a nice cup of tea or cocoa in reach. I found the manual placement of elements to be a bit tedious, as things got caught on colliders and I needed to constantly switch perspectives to make sure elements weren't hovering in midair. I'm still sure some elements do. Yeah, well. If somebody of you has a good way of making sure stuff isn't filled with helium, I'd very much appreciate some tips for this step. Another thing in the category of tackle this early are the doors. You'll most likely need them to function in some capacity, be it by swinging open, being locked, or sliding to some position. There are quite a few doors of both varieties to pick from in this set, and while swinging doors are easy enough to set up by just having them rotate to 90 degrees, the sliding doors might need some more tweaking based on the direction they open in and the way you want to interact with them. In Moonveil, players need to interact with the doors themselves, so sliding them too far into or behind the walls leads to problems I only noticed after the first 2 rounds of playtesting. Yay! Interacting isn't the only thing to keep in mind either. Placing them can also be something you'll grow grey hairs over. There are a few door frames to work with, so I created a simple script in which I could list the doors I wanted to have and spawn a random one at a specific location. This took just a few moments to set up, but saved me quite a bit of time later on. And apropos placing elements, here are some tips from somebody who spent a few weeks with this set. Architectural elements come in set sizes. The large wall elements are 2.5 by 3 units in size. Slim walls are 1.25 units wide instead. Floor elements come in multiple sizes, but I've mostly stuck to the 2.5 by 2.5 ones. Working with the snapping grid built into Unity will massively speed up your workflow here. Just make sure to focus on one aspect at a time, creating one ground level for a building first, then going up will cut the time you spend switching this number from 1.25 to 3 a lot shorter. If you need to still place elements off the grid, hold Control while moving them. Some elements in this set can be placed into or onto each other seamlessly. There are, for example, anything that can hold a liquid and many food items. Drag the container into your scene and drag the contents into it as a child element. It will perfectly fit into it when you set all its positional values to 0. Have to say, I was really impressed by the thoughtful way Synty has placed the pivots of all the elements in the set. Stuff like this makes working with packs like this so much more enjoyable. And since you've done this once now, make it a prefab and sort it into a collection as well to keep reusing it. Lastly, have a look at the lights and give a thought of if you want to add spotlights, point lights, or no lights to them. In Moonveil, I'm using 2 kinds of lights. Open fire ones like torches or fireballs you can douse in water to switch them off, I guess. And lantern ones, which have their light sources set to baked, which means they will stay on no matter what. Some light sources, like the lanterns, come with an emissive material. That already looks nice, but if you're planning on your level to be set at nighttime, maybe adding some additional light spots will work well to enhance the mood. I won't cover lighting here, that's a topic for my second part of the devlog, but if you need to add lights and don't know where to start, look up baking lights and dynamic light probes to seriously enhance the way your scene looks in the dark. And another thing I learned over the last months and from project to project was also how to structure my hierarchy. See, this is what my hierarchy looked like in Down the Mountain. Yeah, good luck finding anything in there. What had I been thinking? The structure was basically, I have a mountain, all the stuff is on the mountain, so all the stuff is a child of the mountain. Well, the idea isn't half bad in general, but maybe mountain was just a bit too big of a unit to handle. So this next tip is all about sizing down your logical units. So let's take a house, for example. I could create an empty parent, call it house, and clutter all I need right into it. But a house has different parts, and maybe I'd like to be able to reuse at least its general shape a few times in my game. So going a more modular feeling route helped me a lot during development. Each house is its own main unit and initially placed at total 0 in my world. It will be moved to a different location later, but by starting at 0, placing elements will be much easier going forward. The first child element is the ground level, but even that one is easily split up into 3 or 4 parts: the floor, the walls, the doorways, and the decoration. Making floors their own area is useful so that you can just create a second level on top, duplicate the floor container and move it onto the new level. It is also super useful because you can now just disable the container and be able to look at elements below. And just as an aside, I highly recommend getting vHierarchy 2 to make working with your hierarchy that much easier. I constantly needed the 2 buttons on the side here to toggle elements off, visible, invisible, or even just touchable in general. You'll see that in action in a moment and find a link to it in the first pinned comment. Making a wall container lets you do basically the same as with the floors, but with the benefit of being able to lock those away to not constantly focus on them if you misclick. This has saved me a lot of time at later stages of level creation. But before you start adding elements, do some research. I don't mean that in any belittling sense, but especially with places we feel like we understand, like this is a garden or this is a home. We come with lots of expectations that just might not be what fits the style, time, or area we are going for. This was actually a major part I had been looking forward to with this pack. While I'm located in Germany and am a major architecture nerd for European architecture from ancient Greece to Bauhaus, I know next to nothing about architecture in Japan, or even Asia in general. I mean, sure, there are elements I recognize work a bit different to what I'm surrounded by. Paper walls, pagoda-shaped roofs, and general wooden architecture are easy differences to the brick and mortar buildings I grew up around. But it doesn't stop at the outside. The inside can look vastly different to what we are used to as well. I mean, if I were to create a castle floor plan, it would look very much like, well, what I know what a castle looks like. Long hallways, lots of tiny rooms, and everything a bit dark, just like the castle in the next town. But just look at this floor plan I found while looking for architectural sources. This looks absolutely amazing and like a total labyrinth, doesn't it? Working with reference material is incredibly important, both to keep a cohesive world, but also to keep in mind what you can and maybe can't do, too. I found this book and went on a snipping spree, copying all images I could use as a reference into a pure ref board. Might have to spotlight this free and amazing tool in the future, but in essence, it's a tool to collect reference materials and make it easily accessible in other apps by using its overlay modes. Super useful helper, highly recommended. Generally, while I'm still far from calling myself knowledgeable in Japanese architecture, taking 2 or 3 evenings just researching materials and images about Edo period architecture was super enjoyable, and I think I learned quite a bit. At least enough to know I want to learn more. And here's where the sample buildings come in handy too. There are a few example scenes to get an idea of how to assemble the pieces in the pack into a cohesive whole. Additionally, there are some pre-made houses as well, which make for a great starting point when creating your levels and, again, give you some ideas of how to approach your own buildings. One thing you'll notice when dragging elements into your scene is that they will be spawned at your hierarchy's root and with some random positional value. Sure, you can drag elements straight into your parent container in the hierarchy, but really, you'll do a combination of both while working. This is where setting a default parent comes in ultra handy. Just right-click on an element, choose Set as Default Parent, and you can drag elements into your scene and they'll automatically be placed in the container you specified. You will still have to zero it out if needed, but I can't overstate how useful this setting was during level creation. Just make sure to remove it once you're done with that container. I started out picking walls one after the other and placing them neatly one by one, and only got smarter about this after the first few dozen hours. Instead of doing it the granular way, place your first wall, zero its position out, then outline the general shape you want your building to have. Constantly duplicate your basic wall with Ctrl D and just move it along the snapping grid. Once you are generally okay with the shape you got, and you might want to further separate this into outer and inner walls, look at the walls available to you. This set comes with a plethora of paper window walls, for example. Choose the one you like, then select all the walls you want to be replaced by the chosen one. Then drag the new wall on top of one of your selected walls while holding down Ctrl. Once you release your mouse button, you will be asked if you want to replace the selection within your object. Say yes. You'll typically use the first entry, but there are times you might also want to copy over any customizations you did, like materials you switched out, but at this stage, just replacing the walls is all you need. Also, this makes changing the height of rooms super simple. Duplicate your wall container, move it up by 3 on Y, select all the walls within, then replace them with one of the half walls of the pack. Okay, back to the main wall container. Once windows are in place, tackle doors next. Do this exactly as before by replacing wall elements with door frame elements, but once they are replaced, hit Ctrl X, switch to your door container, and Ctrl V them into it. This is especially useful for when you want to work with Navmesh navigation, and I'll skip forward a bit for this part. If you want to utilize Navmesh agents, they need to be able to navigate around your house. I'll add the Navmesh surface to the main house object, specify the layers, and hit Bake. And as you can see, my doors and doorways are suddenly being treated like walls, cutting off areas and making them inaccessible to the Navmesh agents. Since I'm a bit new to Navmeshes, my workaround was rather simple. I deselected the door container, baked the surface once again, and re-enabled the doors. I'm quite sure this might lead to issues in some cases, but since all the guards in my game have either set waypoints or are stationary, this worked out remarkably well. With walls, floors, and doors in their own container, you can start cluttering your scene and start making your building feel lived in. I toggle off the snappy grid for this, and by keeping your decorations in one parent object, you can easily cast it aside and create a new one in case you want to reuse your building's shell or general layout at a later point. And it's always handy to know there are shortcuts to randomly rotate elements. With R and a starting and end value in the brackets, you can set the rotation of selected elements to be a bit more random. This is really useful to get a more authentic look instead of having a scene where everything feels like it's sitting at a 90-degree angle. But don't just clutter randomly. Think about the rooms you create, which purpose they serve, and maybe even more importantly, what the player is supposed to do inside of them. In Moonveil, the player has to sneak a lot. I want the rooms to feel like realish places people inhabit. But the most important question with every room was, where can the player hide? Or can they even hide in the first place? Do they need to run into a different room to hide? And if so, how would the layout need to look like to make quick exits possible? Much as I wanted to, I couldn't clutter rooms too much, or the player would constantly run into obstacles and colliders, making movement feel hindered to a degree that's just unfun. To create another level of the building, create a new parent container for the second level, copy-paste the floor and outer shell container into it, then setting its value to 3 in case your rooms are one wall element high, or 4.5 in the case you went with taller rooms by working with half-sized elements. And just in case you are working with a Navmesh, you might need to enable Build a Height Mesh as well, so your agents understand they are in a 3-dimensional space. So once your floor plans are done, you might want to jump right into the roofs, and this is where I recommend to leave your building for a moment. Disable your default parent and hide the building. You see, roofs are a bit special. You get the basic areas of the roof, but there's also something like an overhang that makes it feel more complete. You'll mostly want to utilize those, but placing them at the later point can be quite a pain. So drag the overhang into the main roof object. These numbers work well to make them align as needed. Make this a new prefab to work with going forward. By placing the overhang as a child element, snap to the same corners as your walls, which is ultra useful. Once that's done, repeat it for a corner piece as well. You'll need the overhang as well as a smaller corner for that. Once you've prepared the roofs, delete them from your scene, switch back to your house, create a new roof parent, and fiddle your roof onto the shape of your building. This was, by far, my least favorite step of the whole process, and I was majorly tempted multiple times to try and work out a roof building algorithm just to automate it. Alas, I haven't. And so I just hope I won't have to roof any digital houses anytime soon again. Please. And I have a nitpick for this pack. I really like the shapes and details of the roofs in this pack. Especially when working with those roof ornaments, you can create some truly awesome looking roofs. However, I would have loved to see at least one more variety of roof in here. Maybe wooden shingles, or maybe even a thatched roof. Those were available during the Edo period and would give a lot of variety for town settings in particular, while some buildings like the smaller hamlets of my games, let's call her client, look strangely out of place to be located in some ultra-rural area with costly roofs like this. But this feels like the only area this pack actually fell a bit short of my expectations. Once everything is set up and done, have a look at the alternative textures available. There's a good variety here to build a whole town that manages to look somewhat different from corner to corner with clay, wood and stone as materials. And paper, of course. One thing I was missing, however, and I'm curious as to why that is, are more opulent kinds of walls. This set has a focus on the richer kind of architecture found in wealthy areas and castles. But once we have a look at what those looked like in history, I'm kinda missing golden walls, honestly. But then again, creating my own textures to work with is easy enough. Once you're done with the architecture, you'll probably enjoy the variety of plants to place in any kind of garden. There are oodles amount of bamboo in this set, with some being bound to provide some kind of cover for whatever is behind them. This is a really neat detail I like a lot. Apart from the ginkgo, however, most of the rest of the trees are more like spotlight trees. You can see they grew solitaire by how much room their crowns take up. What I really liked is the variety of trunks. This sounds like such a minor thing, but there are so many packs out there where the trunk of a tree is just a somewhat flimsy looking cylindrical shape. These here have some actual weight and thickness to them. Really like that. There's a good collection of rocks to be found, from pebble to cliff, and I think I remember some of them from other packs too. And just a small tip when you have the set and want to work with a climbing ivy. I found that a scale of 0.5 to 0.75 sizes those elements to a more natural feeling leaf size. But maybe that's because I'm from northern Germany and our own ivy leaves hardly ever go beyond the size of the palm of my hand. There are some alternative textures for the flowers, but really I would have loved to see a few more flowers and moss parts in particular. I'm a huge fan of historical Japanese landscape gardens in particular, and while this is a great start to being able to create those, I think there could be room for a Biomes Japan pack down the line. But that's all about the outside level building here. I'm going to go into a lot of more detail on how to create atmospheric exterior scenes in the next video. And hey, if you enjoyed the video so far, please give it a like and consider subscribing. I typically focus on UI tutorials. Maybe that's something you'd enjoy too. I mentioned alternative textures before, but just looking at those for the walls and plants would feel a bit limited. Generally, whenever you see this blue and white texture on any element, no matter if it's a rug, a chest, a banner, or even just a pillow, you will find an alternative texture with its own colors and even family crest to customize it. I actually built a tiny automator, which I could hand a list of prefabs, set up the alternatives I want to have, and have it create prefab variants ready to be placed inside my scenes with a new texture supply. This way I can quickly access everything without constantly digging through the Materials tab. It also made the process far more enjoyable. My town level now has a nice variety of randomly themed items, while the landlord's compound and the castle each have their own distinct color schemes. This extends to the characters you can find in the pack as well. There are many kinds of weapons and 2 sets of samurai armor in this pack, which can be easily themed this way. Another nitpick I have with this set is the lack of general clothing, however. While the characters look fine, there are no kimono or leather armor sets to be found as a standalone item. I can't fill a shelf with them or drape them over the floor. There aren't even extra shoes I could clutter in the world, which makes especially bedrooms feel a bit lifeless and void of character. There is, however, a good selection of hats. On the note of characters, there are more distinct characters in this pack than I had expected to find. There are just generic characters in male and female. You'll obviously find a geisha. There are nobles and male and female, even samurai. We get a male shinobi and even a kunoichi. A male tengu, which is some form of mythological creature but looks like a man wearing a mask. And a male soldier. Running off the pack are some useful visual effects like fire, leaves or mists, but also more specific ones like kois swimming or incense rising from sticks. The kois are my favorites, but I also need to give a spotlight to the fire here. Apart from there just being a lot of it, you can also see that Synty hasn't just improved their general style and static assets over the last year, but also their VFX. I hope you enjoyed the video. Was there anything you learned or found especially useful? The next video will go into more detail on how I create outdoor scenes in particular. Maybe I'll see you there again? Have a great week!